Hey class, so for this exercise we are going to be preparing our files for Substance Painter. The first thing that we're going to do is combine any duplicate materials in the Hypershade editor. We're also going to organize our meshes in the outliner and create one geo group. Then we're going to delete history, freeze transformations, and then for each material we're going to unfold our UVs and pack them into one 0 to 1 space. Then we'll create a high poly and a low poly version of that geo group. And finally, we're going to export as an OBJ. Let's get started. Okay, to organize our materials in our scene, we're going to go to the Hypershade editor. It's this little blue ball with a white dot on it. And you can see I have all the materials in my scene here. There are 3 different oranges that are very close to each other, so I definitely want to combine those. It looks like there's a couple greens that I could probably combine, so I'll be doing that now. All right, the great thing about the Hypershade editor is that it has all of the information in your scene for your shaders. You can see a preview of your shader on the far right here. You can switch between Arnold and just the plain hardware editor. You can also change any material properties on the right as well. So the good thing about the Hypershade editor is that you can first go to the edit menu and delete any unused nodes. So that's immediately going to wipe out anything in your system that's not used, and that's great. For the rest, I'm going to try and make a little space here. What I'm going to do is select duplicates and then reassign the materials. So to select these orange frosting stars, I'm just going to click on the material, right click, and select the objects with material. Super simple. And then I need to go into my scene itself. So go back to my main scene. I'm actually going to do isolate select. So it looks like it's just these 2 cookie rings. And then I just need to right click, assign an existing material, and I'm going to assign cookie. Cool. And now if I go back to edit and delete unused nodes, I've gotten rid of one more. Cool. So I'm also going to get rid of this this filling. So I'm going to right click. Let's turn off isolate select. So right click, select objects with material. I can go back to isolate select. It looks like another couple rings, so that's great. Then I'm going to right click. Unfortunately, I have to right click over the object, assign it an existing material, and go back to cookie. And now I can delete unused nodes. There we go. Okay, I'm just going to do this for the rest of mine until they're nice and clean. Okay, so I've done combining all of these. I do want to make note that Lambert 1 should always be kept no matter what. Remember that Lambert is your default material and you should never change it or delete it in any way. And then you can also keep this Particle Cloud 1, Shader Glow 1, and Standard Surface 1. They're just kind of default and they won't be moved into Substance Painter. Now, one other note, every one of these materials, except for the default, the Lambert and the other 4, will create its own texture set in Substance Painter. So if you have a ton of different colors, I would advise you to reduce down. I think I'm pushing the limits at 6, but you know, I'm kind of used to this. You also have an option to create just one material for the entire base mesh and assign it, and then individually paint your pieces using UVs in Substance Painter. But since we've already colored ours in Maya, I think it's a good idea just to use our existing ones, just keep them to a minimum. Okay, with that said, let's move on to our next step. And I did assign a color to my cake stand and my cake base. So for our outliner, we're actually going to use our Hypershade editor and its powers of selection in order to help organize our model. So I'm just going to try and make this smaller and move it off to the side. So basically we need to make one group that encompasses all of our model. So I'm just going to create a group. So edit and group. And you can move meshes around by middle mouse button click and drag. You can see when I hover and it creates a line, that means I'm just going to drop it in a place. If it creates a square here, that means it's going to actually create a group, which we don't want. So I'm just going to move my mouse so it creates a little bit of a line and drop it there. There we go. I'm going to rename this group and call this cake_geo, and geo stands for geometry. So right now it has my cake stand in it. I also want to add my cake, so I'm going to click on the cake, middle mouse button, drag, and drop it into the geo. So now I'd use that square. Same thing with the frosting, middle mouse button, drag, and drop into the geo. Now I do have some empty groups here, so if you see I select this candle and I isolate select, it's actually not selecting anything, so I can delete that. This pea sphere, okay, so this is all part of my macaron cookies. So macaron, I'm going to go back to my little Hypershade editor here, and I'm going to select all my objects with the material. You can see it's a bunch of different ones. And I can go to edit and group. Shoot. So this created a null for some reason, so I'm just going to ignore that. And instead I'll make my own group. Okay, so this sphere will now become macaron 1. And I'm just going to grab the other ones and drop them into the macaron. Okay, so this one. Make sure there's none hiding. Okay. And I can rename these as well. So notice that this is not an actual group. This is the symbol for group. This is a symbol for mesh. So right now they're actually not grouped, they're parented. So the macaron cookie 1 is the parent. But I'm hoping maybe they'll fix, if I can select all these. There we go. Now instead of null, I'm getting a group, so I can drop this group inside my cake geo, rename it macarons. And now you have macaron 1, 2, 3, and 4. Cool. All right, let's see what's in this next group. Okay, this is my candles. So I'm just going to rename this group candles. And you drop it into my cake geo. So macaron candles. Okay, next one, I want to select anything that's light green. Actually, I just want to select these 2 green stars. Cool, so edit group. Cool, and let's call this green stars. Drop it into the top. And I'm just going to go through and regroup all of these. It should be in groups of materials that make sense. Okay, now I've finished organizing. You can see that I have my cake geo is my top level group. I have my cake stand, cake, frosting, macaron cookies. Candles are all in their own individual groups. I could take them out though. My green stars, my pink stars, my white stars, and then my chocolate bar are all in their own groups. Okay, so next that I have all of my pieces together, I'm going to delete history and freeze transformations on all of my meshes. So I'm just going to click and drag to select, and then our two really important buttons are here. So delete by type history deletes all of the construction history on your selected objects. So you can see in my attribute editor, let's just grab one object. That this is all of my construction history, all of these little tabs here showing these poly splits and etc. When I delete my construction history, they should go away. There you go. And now I'm only down to the different materials that are on my model, a shape node, and just the object itself. The reason we do this is because we don't want any other programs to have to deal with our construction history. We just want the way the model is shaped right now. So let's delete construction history. I'm also going to freeze my transformations. Now look what happens when I freeze transformations. Check out my right-hand box here in the channel box layer editor. Hit 0, so that zeroes everything out. Now notice that zeroing everything out could potentially be considered a construction history thing. So we're going to delete construction history again. And then I always just click the freeze transformations button one more time, but it's really the delete construction history that's most important. So as long as you had all of your objects selected and we click these two buttons twice, then we are in good shape. And we can move on to the next thing. So we're going to select all of our objects by color, and we're going to lay out or unfold our UVs to make sure they're correctly unfolded. And then we're going to lay them out in a 0 to 1 UV space. So I'm going to use my Hypershade to select a color. So let's start with my cookies. So I'm just going to select all my objects with this cookie material. And then I'm going to go to my UV editor. So UV editor. And you can see these UVs were made automatically when my objects were created. So if you don't have UVs for an object, you can always create them automatically or camera-based. We'll get into that later in the semester. Probably for right now, automatic would be your best kind of quick fix. You can always delete your UVs and just create them again using automatic. But for right now, let's just keep the ones that were created. And then we're going to go to modify and unfold our UVs, because this is what our UVs looked like when they were first created. Now let's take a look what they look like now, since my model has been rotated and adjusted. And now finally, I'm going to lay them out, because right now it's showing me in my little handy dandy shell here that I have 4 UV shells. I have 886 overlapping UVs. So let's fix that by going to modify and layout. There we go. And so now my 4 cookies have been flattened, unfolded properly, laid out, and they do all fit in this 0 to 1 space for this texture. Okay, so that's the first one. I'm going to do the same thing with the next one. So I'm going to go back to my Hypershade. I'm going to select my frosting star material, select the objects with this material, close out a Hypershade, go back to my UV editor, and you can see again, they all have a very similar shape, so I'm just going to go to modify, unfold. And this is a bit on the wonky side, but hopefully that'll work. And then modify and layout. There we go. So this is kind of what my frosting stars are all looking like. If you want to see what the pattern is looking like in our UV, you can turn on this grid. And then in the main view, you can see what this layout is looking like. And it actually, considering we're just using the base UVs and just unfolding and laying out, rather than cutting ours ourselves, they actually look pretty good. There's not a lot of stretching or pulling in these checker boxes, so I consider that a win for this first exercise. Okay, so one more thing that I want to draw your attention to is on the right hand side, when I've got my checker box on, you see that it's lighting up these other 0 to 1 spaces. And what's happening there is that it means that these UVs are not necessarily entirely in this one box. So I'm going to scale them down using my scale tool. So I'm just going to grab these UV shells. So right click, UV shell, click and drag. And then with my scale tool, I can just scale them down just a tiny bit. And now if I turn back on my checkerboard, you'll see that only this checkerboard is active. All right, so I want you to do that for each of your different materials, and then we'll meet back in a second. Okay, class, one more thing. So I was working on the base to this model, and you can see this is a really great illustration of when our UVs get stretched. So it looks okay for the cake itself. It's not like perfect, but it's okay. Same with this piece, the frosting's okay. But looking at this base, it goes from pretty normal looking checkers to completely stretched to maybe one checker for the entire top. So this is a case when we need to delete our UVs and remake them. So I'm going to go to my UV, select my object, go to my UV editor, click and drag, select by UV shell, click and drag, and I'm going to delete these. Sorry, you have to go back and select it in here. Create. Let's try automatic. Now automatic is basically projects from all different directions for your UVs, but you can see it is breaking my model up into many different pieces. But it looks pretty good once it's flattened out. But I'm going to try this one more way. So this would be acceptable for right now. But let's try one more way. So I'm going to select my UV shells, delete them, and go to Create Camera Based. Oh, sorry, you have to go back in here, Object Mode, then Create Camera Based. And you can see this is making basically a picture of whatever my angle my camera is at for my UVs. Now I'm going to do that one more time. Sorry. UV shell, delete, select by object, create camera based. And the reason I did that is because I want to put my cut lines for my UVs in the back somewhere here. So I'm also going to turn off my texture view. So this one, use default material, so you can see a little better. And what I need to do is select some edges that will be cuts. So I'm going to right click, select by edge, find one of these vertical lines and double click it. And that's going to be one of the cuts that I make for these vertical pieces. The other thing I want is that this kind of round area be cut into one piece as well. So let me solo this so you can just see. Oops. Go to object mode, select, solo it, select by edges, and now I'm just going to cut, I think, right around here to this outside edge. And I'm going to go into my UV editor and cut. And you can see here now I've created a nice cut line on the top. I'm going to do the same thing. Sorry, I didn't make the actual cut on the side here, so I'm going to double click again on my edge. I could deselect this, so I'm just going to control and click. Control and click. There we go. And cut. There you go. So now I have a piece here, and it goes all the way down to the bottom. So let's take a look at this UV shell. So we're going to grab this and go to Modify, Unfold. And you can see now this is the base, and this is the top. So now that you've cut your first UV. So I'm going to select these two along with the rest of my cake. So I'm just going to go back. I put this object, the stand, the cake, and the frosting all as one color. So I'm going to make them all in one layout. So you can see all my pieces here. I'm just going to click and drag them. UV shell, click and drag, modify, and layout. I'm going to check with my checkerboard just to see it's actually overlapping a little bit. So I'm going to hit my R to scale and scale it down. And now all of my pieces are on this one. I am going to turn this off, and let's turn back on my checkerboard, and now you can see what a better looking UV layout looks like, where all my checkers are more or less the same size, and there's no weird stretching. So that's a really good point if you need to cut your own UVs to counteract stretching. Now there's one more thing that I'm slightly concerned of. It's these 3 candles, because they have multiple materials on each of them. I would like to grab these particular UVs. I'm going to scale them down and just put them off to the side and up on my UV editor. I'm slightly concerned that because they're on multiple layers, so they'll be showing up in multiple scenes, that these little UVs may overlap with another material and get artifacting. So you can move your individual UVs with your move tool and scale and rotate, and I'm just going to scale these down and put them off to the side. They'll still collect color, but not have as much detail, which is fine for pieces like this. Okay, so now that we're all set with that, what we're going to do is make a low poly version of our cake model and a high poly version of our cake model. Now, right now, our model is actually incredibly low poly. So I'm going to double click on this name, and let's just call this original. Then I'm going to go to edit and duplicate. Let's click on the first one, and now we can actually hide this. So hide selection, and it's going to gray out here. So for our original number 1, I'm going to double click on this, and this will become our low poly. So it's going to be cake underscore geo underscore low. And this version, we're actually going to smooth it a bit so that when we bring it into Substance Painter, it has a really nice smooth surface and quality about it. Okay, so I'm going to start with my cake stand. If I press 1 for hard surface preview, you'll see that it's pretty jagged, and it could be smoothed. If we're going for super duper ultra low poly, I would not be smoothing it, but for right now, I think this is probably best because we have a lot of objects with a lot of curves. Okay, so to smooth this, we're going to go to Mesh and Smooth. And you can see instantly it's getting a lot smoother just with one set of divisions. I'm going to do the same thing by clicking and dragging and selecting all my other objects. So Control and click on the base to deselect it since I already smoothed it once. Go to Mesh and Smooth. The shortcut to repeat a command is G, so you can always press G. Okay, so now this is nicely smooth. The last thing I'm going to do is click and drag and select my whole object and go to Mesh Display and Soften Edge. Okay, So the next thing I need to do is rename all of the meshes inside my groups with an underscore of low. Now there's an easy way to do it. The best way is to make sure you're clicking and dragging to select all of the individual meshes in your hierarchy. Then let's go to Modify, Search and Replace Names. So we're going to search for $, and $, just means keep whatever string is already there, and then we're going to replace with underscore low. And I'm going to do all of my selected objects, and let's hit replace. And now you can see in my outliner on the side here, I've got cake scanned underscore low, cake underscore low, etc. All of my items within my group have been renamed, so that's perfect. And so that's nice and smooth. Now I'm going to duplicate this object again and make my high poly version. So edit, duplicate, double click on this one, and let's call this underscore high. And for this low poly version, I just want to hide it so that I'm not selecting it or changing it. So I'm going to go to Display, Hide, Hide Selection. And now with this high poly version, I can also click and drag it. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go to Modify, Search and Replace Names. And this time we're going to search for underscore low. And we're going to replace it with underscore high. Going to do selected. Now that works. So now all of the items in our groups should be renamed underscore high. There we go. Okay, so now what makes this high versus the low poly version? Well, we've got to smooth it one more time. So I'm going to click and drag in the screen, in the viewport, go to Mesh and Smooth. And this is going to take some time because remember, the more topology we have or the more faces we have, the more processing power. And this definitely does take a little more time on my computer. So I'm just going to add one set of divisions, and then I'm going to go to Mesh Display and Soften Edge. So this will be our nice high poly version. And once it turns orange, we know it's done, and we can get ready to save and export to Substance Painter. Okay, so to save our model, I'm going to click off of it, and then click on the main group to the left. Go to File, Export Selection. I'm going to save this as cake underscore geo underscore, this is the high poly version, high. I'm going to make sure in my options on the right that the most important thing is include texture info and then smoothing is on. We're going to save it as a file type of OBJ. You could also do FBX. They're both universal file types. OBJ is a little smaller as it doesn't include any animation info. And hit Export Selection. So that's our high poly version. So I can go back, and you can see this is going to take a little time to save. Now I can go to Display and hide this selection. Click on my low poly version and Display, Show, and Show Selection. So now this one, we're going to go to File and Export Selection. And this one will be cake underscore geo underscore low. Same settings. All right, so now we're all ready to put these into Substance Painter, bake our high poly to our low poly, and then get texturing. Let me know if you have any questions, and enjoy.